So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. This is going to be a field battle on the grassy plains, and this one was sent to me by a DF lister, and it's between one of the more popular factions in Linden. I see quite a lot of Linden because of how user-friendly they are to play. You know, as I've said many times before now, Linden, it's very, very difficult to make a bad army with Linden because all of their hybrid units means that a lot of their units can be used for multiple different things, which means, you know, they can be useful regardless of what kind of army they fight for a lot of the time. Like, for example, the 4 Linden Marines, very good at dealing with heavily armoured infantry and also very good at zoning out cavalry. This also extends to things like the Harlinden Guard, which of course Spear Archer hybrids, Mithlon Marines, all that sort of thing, and also they have a very cost-effective front line of sort of the basic Harlinden infantry and the pikes, both of which together can be quite difficult for several factions to overcome. All of these things, when they're working together, can be very, very effective most of the time. And they are going to be facing off against one of the factions which I don't actually see a lot of, not so popular in this current patch I don't think, and that's going to be Dale. Now, as I've said before, Dale, compared to some of the other Kingdoms of Men, they do have a very strong skirmish line, as you would expect, but some of their other aspects may be a little bit lacking compared to a few other factions. For example, Arthedain have also got a very strong skirmish line for a Kingdom of Men, but they also have a very strong cavalry presence to back this up, as well as sort of several units of rangers, all that body piercing, and they are also able to bring a very cheap and cost-effective phalanx formation as well, which is very popular, whereas Dale, in order to do something similar, they either have to use notably worse units, their militia units are not quite as cost effective as Arthedain's, or they have to invest a lot more in their infantry, which of course takes away from some of the funds that they can use for their very strong skirmishes. We will start off with Linden, and this is Lister's army, as I'm sure you've noticed already, and he has of course got some Harlinden infantry and 4 Linden pikemen. Most Linden armies, particularly in sort of a wider field battle like this, are going to utilise both of these units in tandem because they work so well together. But you may also see these as well, the Mithlon pikemen, a little bit more expensive than the 4 Linden pikes, but noticeably better. They, in terms of their relative power, they exist just above the Uruk-hai pikemen and that sort of kind of unit. You know, they aren't quite as strong as stuff like the First Legion pikes from Khazad-dûm or the Naruna-aru Sentinels from Umbar, but they are a step down from that, but they are a step up from most other basic pikes. So if you want to saturate your line with all of these pole arms here as Linden, you can certainly do so. He's got 2 units of them in the middle, as well as 2 units of 4 Linden pikemen either side, and then he's got his Harlinden infantry on either side of them. Interestingly enough, not as many archers as I would expect. Linden, if they want to engage in a skirmish fight, particularly with a strong skirmish faction like Dale, I would kind of have expected them to bring more archers. I would have expected to see the Harlinden Guard. I also would have expected to see the Wardens of Elos Tyrian sort of in reserve until the end, so to speak, but it looks as though all Lister has brought is 2 units of the 4 Linden archers. Not that this is a bad move by any means, but they certainly won't be winning an elongated skirmish fight with Dale like this, so I would imagine that Linden are going to have to be very aggressive, otherwise their army could end up being peppered down, particularly their pikes at the front, by Dale's strong skirmishers. They also have some 4 Linden Marines, which will be useful for a variety of things. Dale's higher tier units in particular have a tendency to have very good armour, stuff like the Barding Herd, the Elves of Esgaroth, and even up to the Uber units like the Girian's Paladins and the Dalian Royal Guard. But also they can be used to zone out cavalry from the backlines. Now, in terms of overall cavalry effectiveness, I would certainly give Linden the advantage for the most part over Dale. But even so, this is the sort of thing which can really hammer that home. A very good, versatile unit that you see a lot of as Linden, and he's got 2 units of those on either side. Another unit that he has over on this side, sort of disrupting the symmetry of this formation a little bit, is the Noldorin Blade Masters. Now again, the Noldorin Blade Masters are going to be a difficult single unit for Dale to bring down. All of Dale's Uber units, for example the Girian's Paladins, they have got a definite anti-armour focus, whereas the Noldorin Blade Masters are very skillful heavy elven swordsmen with multiple HP. There are very few units in the game that will want to get mixed up in a one-on-one fight with the Noldorin Blade Masters for that reason, and Dale in particular, they're going to want to try to overwhelm them or focus them down from a distance with their skirmishers. And then we have a lot of cavalry, mounted units on either side, which again is not too surprising considering Linden can certainly push home an advantage in that field. The General's Bodyguard, Círdan, the Bearded Elf, is going to be riding with the Noldorin Horse Lords, a very common sight indeed. Obviously the Noldorin Horse Lords are fantastic in a sustained melee even against other knights because of that elven skill, but they do lack a shield. So again, over a long period of time, Dale's skirmishers could start to inflict a pretty hefty amount of damage, even on that when the hit points are expended. And then just outside of them, we have some Mithlon Lancers, so they have their Javelins, which obviously that's armor-piercing missile damage, and then they become Lancers when they run out of ammunition or when they are simply charged in. So this is good. This is obviously armor-piercing charge, again, plays into Linden's focus around hybrid units. And yeah, the Mithlon Lancers, you don't really want to get them mixed up with other cavalry too much. The Javelins are the best tool for that, so you can kite other cavalry with them, and then once all the ammunition's expended, hopefully in the late game they're still alive, so that you can do some charges into the enemy infantry, some hammer and anvil, to push home that advantage that you have. And over on this side we have some Wardens of Harlingen, so we're seeing actually all of the Linden mounted units. They don't have too many, but you know, overall they have, bound up in all of their cavalry units, they have basically everything you could want. So they have the Wardens of Harlingen, which are archer cavalry, spear cavalry hybrids, so they do have an anti-cavalry bonus in melee, if I'm not mistaken. And also they have that the same ability that all horse archers have to fire for over a long period of time in the battle. And of course, when it comes to most horse archers, a lot of enemy cavalry is going to want to charge into them. But with the Wardens of Harlingen, that might not be such a good idea with their spears. Although again, one of the things that they need to be on the lookout for is the fact that Dale have probably invested more in their foot archers, which means the horse archers do need to be a little bit careful of hanging too close to the Dalian lines for too long. And then finally we have the Mithlond nobles, which chariots count as elephants because of their overall mass and their ability to go through lines. Obviously the Mithlond nobles, in my opinion, are superior to the runic chariots purely because they use javelins as their projectiles rather than arrows. This means that their close range punches increased that much more. You know, the javelins just tend to do a lot more damage. It can also make it very difficult for enemy cavalry that's coming in, because they often have to go through a few javelin projectiles to get to the Mithlond nobles. However, all chariot units basically have the same problem. If they stop and are stuck in the enemy lines for any period of time, they will start to fall away very quickly, but if you keep them moving, they can be a real nightmare for the opponent to deal with. Now then, we shall move on to Dale, and just looking at their army composition before, I imagine they have gone much more skirmish heavy. You can see that Mark XMD has gone for 2 units of the Dalian marksmen here on the front line. I think this is 2 units. Is it 3? No, it is 2. They're just stretched out. But yeah, the Dalian marksmen, they are obviously a good choice in this sort of situation, because 1-to-1, they should beat the Linden skirmishers in a prolonged skirmish fight. It would probably be quite close. But the Dalian units with their increased numbers and their just overall increased survivability should be just fine there. And then of course they've got other skirmishers behind them, so a good choice here. He's got some civilians, which are is this his general's unit? I don't think it is. So I think the civilians are just here just in case the Linden cavalry decides to try and charge directly into the archers. He'll just throw the civilians under the bus to break up the charge. He's gone for the layered skirmisher approach, which means Linden are certainly not going to want to engage Dale in a prolonged skirmish fight, otherwise they'll be playing right into Dale's hands. 2 units of Bardian marksmen as well, after the Dalian marksmen on the front line have already absorbed a lot of the arrow fire coming at them. The Bardian marksmen even tankier, and also they double as pretty decent line infantry when they're out of ammunition as well. So a good all-around choice here for Dale. And then we'll get back into their infantry line. This is where Dale might end up struggling a little bit, depending on what they brought. So he's gone for a double phalanx here. He's gone for some Lake Town pikemen and for some Barding herd. Now, I'm not sure whether I would have brought the Barding herd per se, because they are a halberdier unit, which is AP, both of which don't tend to be very good against Linden, I have to say. The AP is not useful at all against Linden, more so than any other faction in the game. They only have 1 unit which has hefty armour values, and that unit is not on the field today. Also, Linden's heavy focus around pikes means they will generally be able to outrange the Barding herd on the front line. Now, it's not all bad news. The Barding herd are a very strong, tanky unit. They might not have multiple HP, but they are still very difficult to bring down, very hefty armour values. So hopefully they'll still be able to hold the front line, and they will need to, because while the Lake Town pikes do have the range of the pikemen, so they will be able to match up with the Linden pikes, their stats and their effectiveness are certainly not on the same level as the elves. Definitely a cheap and cheerful pikeman there. And they've gone for a fairly hefty line of them, although there are a few units here mixed in of Lake Town spears. Again, though, I'm not sure whether they'll do too much damage to the very skillful Linden units. We'll see. Maybe they can push into the Linden pike formations, because Linden have gone primarily for pikes, more so than infantry. So yeah, we'll see about that. We've got some Elves of Esgaroth back here. They may very well... There's another unit of Barding herd as well, so some more Barding herd and then 2 units of Elves of Esgaroth on either side. Again, they are up in terms of effectiveness alongside stuff like the Guardians of Cardoom and the Castamir's Legion, that sort of price bracket, that sort of level of effectiveness, they could prove to be very, very important here. They really don't want to surrender the infantry fight to Lyndon if they can help it. And really one of the main tools that they have to deal with that in this situation is going to be the Earls, because they are very good. Obviously nice armor values as well, but Lyndon have brought other units like their cavalry and their javelins that can certainly deal with the Earls. And even the Harlingen infantry won't go down without a fight to the Earls. And then back here, before we get into the cavalry, you can see the Dalian General is in a unit of Blackshot Dragon Slayers. Again, an AP Archer, is it really necessary against Lyndon? Maybe. I mean, the Blackshot Dragon Slayers can certainly do a lot of damage over a quick period of time. So maybe it's worth it, particularly if you're trying to snipe out something like the Mithlon Nobles or the Noldorin Horse Lords, we shall see. And obviously when all is said and done, they are pretty strong in melee as well. As I said when in my favourite units video, the Blackshot Dragon Slayers are a very common sight for Dale, because they're a little bit more dependent on this unit than Arthedain or Mordor are on their armor-piercing archer. And then finally we will go through the cavalry. So we got, I think, 2 units, no, just a singular unit actually of Dalian cavalry. Lance cavalry, very, very quick. In terms of units they're similar to, you can look at stuff like the Serpent Guard, or maybe even the Dunedain Commanders. Obviously not quite as good as either of those 2 units, but you know, they are fast-moving, high-charge lancers, which could do a lot of damage to Lyndon. But Lyndon in general make it very difficult to use your cavalry, so Mark XMD is going to have to be right on top of his cavalry micro if he wants to use them effectively. And then on either side he's got 2 units of the Earls of Dale. Again, quite a common sight. Generally speaking, they are used defensively to guard your flanks so that your skirmishers can go to work, and that is exactly what I imagine they're going to be used for here. Although it's going to be difficult again, Lyndon have got the tools to make cavalry play against them very difficult. So Mark XMD is once again going to have to be very aware of what his cavalry is doing in order to use them effectively. But without further ado, let's begin. And I would imagine that Lyndon are going to move forward relatively quickly, and they are. So again, this is interesting because quite a lot of the time actually I've noticed that Lyndon do tend to sit back and engage in a skirmish fight because they can with sheer numbers. It is risky perhaps, but even so, and this is actually quite unfortunate here because Mark XMD is shooting into the Harlingen infantry, and they have shields, which means they're going to be much better placed to absorb that. In other sections of the line, however, fortunately, they are shooting at the pikemen, and they really want to be focusing down the pikes, in particular the Mithlon pikemen, because of how good they are. You can see there's also some 4 Lyndon Marines pushing up with them. And now it does look as though Mark has shifted his focus onto the Mithlon pikemen, which is very good to see. You can see over here that already we can see the civilians being used as sacrificial lambs, blocking the advance of this unit of Harlingen infantry. And in fact, I think in the initial more chaotic parts of this fight we will turn it down to half speed. And obviously the civilians are going to get absolutely dumpstered by experienced elven soldiers, but this is buying them time. This is breaking up Lister's advance. It's allowing the Bardian marksmen to shoot a few more volleys into Lyndon as they advance. These pikes even got caught on the civilians as well, which is a real boon, because they are just going to hang around and wait for a little while longer. But you can also see the Noldorin Horse Lords taking advantage of the fact that Dale's lines were fairly far apart in terms of spacing, and they do charge into the Bardian marksmen, although it wasn't actually too good of a charge, to be honest with you. The Bardian marksmen shifted their position at the last second to make landing the charge a little bit more awkward. This is also the chance that the Blackshot Dragon Slayers have been waiting for, and also the Earls are on station. Now the Earls would still lose to the Noldorin Horse Lords, but it certainly wouldn't be a fight that Lyndon wants to get mixed up in for too long. They want to use their cavalry's mobility as much as they possibly can, although the Noldorin Horse Lords are turning around, which is risky because you can see the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, their projectiles, dark black projectiles coming in, already targeting the Noldorin Horse Lords, and you can see that they are now cycling back out. You can see that Lyndon have left some units behind, but that's not too big of a deal. Dale are certainly going to be a bit more defensive. They're not going to try and wrap around Lyndon too much. It's very difficult to do that to Lyndon anyway, so they can afford to leave some units and reserve the 4 Lyndon archers a little bit further back. Marines have been pushed forward. The Noldorin Blade Masters are here, so far very aggressive, pushing everything up. You can see the Wardens of Harlingen over on that flank. The Mithlon Lancers still waiting. And now the Dalian skirmishers firing. If Dale are going to win this, it will be on the back of their skirmishers. It certainly won't be because of their infantry. Their cavalry can only really stall the Lyndon cavalry. The problem they do have, however, is going to be the Mithlon nobles, I feel. If the Mithlon nobles start charging around and disrupting the skirmishes for extended periods of time, it's going to prove to be pretty difficult for Dale to do the damage they need to quickly here. As the Dalian front line prepares itself, I've always really liked the look of the Barding herd. Sort of heavily armoured, shields on their back. But in this situation, I'm not sure whether the Barding herd are what's called for. Over here, they should be able to hold off the Harland infantry for a time. And overall, Linden's lack of overall numbers, well, the elves' lack of overall numbers in general, might prove to be a bit of a problem, because they will have to cut their way through quite a lot of Dalian troops, although this is the only line that Dale have set up made up of mostly infantry. They have some infantry units in reserve, so I would be interested to see how this is going to go as the Harland infantry gets ready to start fighting. Again, it's going to be a long time before Linden cut their way through this line. They will probably be able to do it, particularly with the support of all these javelins. But I have a feeling that their cavalry and their mounted units are going to have to do something as well. For those Mithlon nobles firing at the Earls, decent choice. Rob Dale of some of their reserve infantry. The problem with having a static front line, of course, is that the enemy could just try and ignore it, which is what the Noldorin Blade Masters are attempting to do over here. Let's go back up to 1 speed for the time being. And actually, they are just going to charge in. And this section of the line is made up mostly of Lake Town pikemen. And needless to say, the Noldorin Blade Masters are far superior to them. You can also see these Earls are probably going to try and wrap around the Noldorin Blade Masters. They could even be recharged by the Earls of Dale. You can see now that the Mithlon Lancers are coming in. And the Earls of Dale are going to recharge them. Now, of course, they are melee cavalry, so the charge isn't huge. But this will still deal a pretty decent chunk of damage. You can see that several of the Noldorin Blade Masters start to fall. And this is Linden's strongest infantry unit by a long way on the field today. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers are still targeting the Noldorin Horse Lords. Real pain for Linden. But the 4 Linden Marines are now starting to open up as well. And these Linden Javelins could prove to be very, very damaging. The Mithlon Nobles are also in the back lines, which again could be extremely devastating. If they recharge this front line, it could cause a collapse from Dale. And you can see the sections where they are, the Lake Town Pikes are going toe-to-toe with the Linden Pikes, is where Dale's front line is starting to look very, very thin already. The Barding herd are doing a better job, but even so, all they can really hope to do is stall. Here come the Mithlon Nobles. Now, this is something that I'm not sure Dale has the resources to stop at this point. They're trying to disrupt the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, but now the Mithlon Nobles are going to charge into the rear of the Dalian front line. The Earls of Dale are actually routing from the Noldorin Horse Lords. So it looked like it was going fairly well for Dale initially, but as time is going on, the Lake Town units in particular are really starting to struggle on the front line against Linden. Having said that, the Barding herd are still doing a pretty stellar job. Here you can see the Earls of Dale routing in the face of the Noldorin Horse Lords. A charge over here from the Mithlon Lancers into the Earls of Dale. And despite the initial early pressure, the Noldorin Blade Masters are still alive and well, still doing nice damage, and they should be able to weather the storm. The Mithlon Nobles are going to prove to be the real thorn in Dale's side, however, I would imagine. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers probably need to start doing some work. Over here, meanwhile, Linden did lose micro on their Wardens of Harlinden because of the fact they were microing their chariots, and this does mean that they were caught in melee by the Earls of Dale and taking some pretty substantial damage. So that could be the end, or at least a significant portion of damage dealt to the Linden Horse Archers. So if they were going to lose a cavalry unit, this would probably be the one they would choose. Some 4 Linden Marines, meanwhile, have broken off from the main Linden army and are immediately being hunted down by some Dalian cavalry. Now again, they are spearmen, so the Dalian cavalry do not want to stick around too long in melee with them, but the Dalian cavalry's charge bonus should be enough to do extreme damage to them if the charge connects well. But they were a little bit broken up, so the charge could have gone better there. As you can see here, the Linden infantry's superiority to Dale's is really starting to shine through. The Harland infantry, the Lake Town units were just not good enough in this situation to slow down Linden's progress. The Barding herd have done a stellar job, as I've said, but overall, there are a few Lake Town units left alive, to be fair. But there's still this problem over here. You can see the Mithlon Nobles just charging through, the chariots with their huge mass values doing a lot of damage, interrupting the Dalian skirmishers from firing, and the longer that Linden can do that, the more likely victory becomes for them. Blackshot Dragonslayers need to start dishing out the damage quickly, because Linden, as it stands, are starting to overwhelm the back lines. You can also see that the 4 Linden archers have moved forward, and they are now starting to open up on individual units. The Mithlon Lancers getting into position. You can see the Mithlon Nobles already charging into the Black Shots. I think Linden see that if Dale do not have their Black Shots firing, they are not in a good way. Even so, Dale's front line has held up reasonably well, considering that it was mainly made up of Lake Town units with the support of Barding Herd. The Mithlon Lancers coming in, doing a nice charge there on the Blackshot Dragonslayers, and they're starting to take some fairly decent damage. They're going to need some support fairly quickly, but I'm not sure if any is forthcoming. The Earls of Dale are there. The Warns of Harlenden were pushed out to the flank of the battlefield. Meanwhile, over here in the backlines, you can see the Dalian cavalry is over here. It's taking some damage, but it needs to start charging into the 4 Linden archers. It needs to do something out here. Again, keeping track of all your micro can be difficult, but when things are starting to move against you, you certainly need to be on top of everything. It can always, you know, the temptation is to panic when you're in a situation like this, when your nice defence has been circumvented by a bunch of cavalry and they're starting to charge around your backlines, running over all your skirmishers. But it's not as bad as it looks for Dale. You know, if Dale can sort of weather this storm, they're actually in a pretty decent way. I mean, they've still got their Dalian marksmen firing all the while. They are putting pressure on Linden's backline with their own cavalry. But the infantry fight is going to slowly but surely turn against them. And if they don't have any skirmishers to answer these pikemen in the late game, they won't be able to pull this off. You can see the Mithlon pikemen really proving their expertise in the middle. The Mithlon pikemen just destroyed the Lake Town pikemen in the 1-to-1 fight, and it goes to show that cheap pikes are all well and good. I'm a big fan of cheap pikes, but you cannot put them up against more elite pikemen and expect them to hold the line for a long time. No, because that was a very quick fight in favour of Linden. The Mithlon nobles still charging around, still doing damage, proving to be a real nightmare here for the Dalian army. Those sound effects, the elephant sound effects, they need to be careful though, because they are getting wedged here on the Barding Herd, and you can see they're already starting to fall down very rapidly. And in fact, that is the end of the Mithlon nobles. They tried to charge through the Dalian line, but they weren't united, and they ended up dying. So there's still one of them over here. One left alive, but you know, they were too divided then, and that is the problem. Chariot units can tend to get stretched, and that can make it a little bit more difficult to use them. The Dalian cavalry was doing damage here into the backlines of the Linden units, trying to stop the 4 Linden archers from firing, which is not a bad idea in this situation. Getting a hammer and anvil strike on the Linden infantry line is easier said than done, considering it's mostly made up of pikemen. But Dale is still very much in this fight. It's a very closely contested one, especially seeing as time goes on. Dale could end up with the cavalry advantage here. They still have this fairly healthy unit of Earls, and I haven't seen the Noldorin Horse Lords in quite some time, so I would imagine they've been slowly but surely focused down by the Black Shots. There's still this one chariot running around. The Warns of Harlenden are coming back, starting to fire some more of their projectiles into this area. The Bardian Marksmen also over here. The Mithlon Lancers getting another nice charge. I think they were going for the Black Shots, but they ended up mostly connecting with the Bardian Marksmen. Even so, it's damage. The Earls trying to save this situation. Very good defensive unit of cavalry, the Earls. Meanwhile, we'll go back up to full speed at this point in time. This part of the line here, I'm amazed the Barding Herd is still holding on. It really does go to show how tanky they are. They might not be at their most effective here, because all of the units they're fighting are lightly armoured, but this does go to show their defensive pedigree, because they've held on for a long period of time here, in a situation where it was always turning against them really when their Lake Town units fled the field. The last of the Lake Town are now routing over on this side. Over here, however, the Barding Herd are starting to wrap up the Linden line. Bardian Marksmen are also giving it their all in melee against some of the Linden cavalry, and Linden could be starting to feel the heat a little bit here. They've still got a pretty strong area of infantry over here, centred around the Noldorin Blade Masters. I'm actually really surprised that the Dalian skirmishers are trying to go after the Linden skirmishers. They've got a point-blank shot at the Noldorin Blade Masters here, and they really need to start doing damage to them, because they don't have anything that could match them. at this point in time, so they need to shoot them down from afar. The Bardian Marksmen are shaken. There are still 2 Noldorin Horse Lords, including the Bearded Elf, fighting off against some marksmen here. There's still some Earls left alive as well. There goes the Bearded Elf.
Our chances of victory with it.
In all fairness, though, the Elven units are very unlikely to rout because of the loss of a general. That would be something more likely to affect Dale. And the Blackshot Dragon Slayers are in a relatively strong position here. And again, we saw in the last match where we saw Dale in a 1v1 up against Arthedain, the Earls of Dale charging around the battlefield in the late game, but their lack of an overall charge bonus was why Dale couldn't pull it out. They are very tough, but they're not really focused around the damage they can deal unless it's to other cavalry and melee. Trying to bring down these 4 Linden Marines. You can see the civilians which have returned just being thrown in at this point, trying to make life a little bit more awkward for Linden. But yeah, Linden are going to win on this side. There's only a very small amount of Dalian marksmen left alive. Over on this side it's a little less clear. Some Dalian marksmen were committed. I would still, with the support of those Mithlon Lancers charging in, making life a misery for these Earls, I would still back the Noldorin Blade Masters to fight their way out of this, to be honest with you. Especially seeing as the Barding Herd are not really in a clean formation at this point in time, and there's Lake Town units which are not really in formation. There's routing going on, Barding Herd. The Dalian Marksmen really need to, they need to start shooting down these Noldorin Blade Masters with something. And they are now. They got a volley off, but it was a very broken volley with the Mithlon Lancers charging in there. Well, we can see over here the Earls of Dale trying to get into the back lines to silence the Linden Archers once and for all. But it's going to take several cycle charges before they go down, thanks to the lower charge values of melee cav. And you can see that the frontline fight has been won by Linden at this point. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers are here. Dale would really not want their general to die, because they are likely to be affected by some sort of morale shock. As the Harland infantry charges into the Blackshot Dragon Slayers. Here come the Earls, though, with a nice rear charge, timely as well, because that could cause all of this Elven infantry to break, or at the very least it'll make it so they're weak enough that the Blackshots can finish them off. Some Barding Herd, a unit of 50 Barding Herd, who have sort of wrapped around this unit of 4 Linden Pikemen. There's still Elven missiles coming in from the backfield, however. Dalian Marksmen trying to get into position over here. Dale trying to consolidate in the backfield, but as they retreat, units are getting caught. And I'm still not sure if they have a unit which is going to be capable of taking on the Noldorin Blade Masters at this point in time. Lake Town Pikemen starting to run for the hills. 4 Linden Archers opening up. Nice charge there, and they've managed to make it so this unit of Barding Herd will still be a factor. Dale's archers do still have ammunition, but a lot of them are shaken, so it wouldn't take too much to rout them. If the Noldorin Blade Masters so much as touch them, you would imagine they're probably going to rout. They need to get into a... yeah, they're doomed. There's no escape for them when part of their unit's already engaged with the 4 Linden Marines down here. The Elven missiles coming out. The Earls now trying to silence the 4 Linden Archers. And at this point, the tankiness of the Earls is really standing them in good stead. A lesser unit of cavalry would have long died from all the pressure they've taken. They might not be multiple HP, but they're really high armor values, and the fact they have a nice shield value as well, really standing them in good stead. At this point, as it's always been in this fight, Dale are going to be relying on their skirmish power to win it for them. And you can see the Bardian Marksman really shooting into the Noldorin Blade Masters there. That was a good volley. Not many of the Noldorin falling, however. The Blackshots still have ammunition, though. And that, again, these are nice volleys. Lots of nice damage coming in here, but not too many of the Noldorin Blade Masters are dying. Their hit points here are saving them. And they are going to be able to get into melee with them. Another nice point-blank volley. And again, the Noldorin Blade Masters stand firm. And the Bardian Marksmen are not going to be able to win that. The Blackshots might be able to get some side charges in, or side shots in. A side charge will come from the Earls. Those Barding Herd are going to be defeated by what's left of the 4 Linden Marines and any stragglers from the Pikemen units. Nice charge there from the Earls of Dale, killing several of the Noldorin Blade Masters. The Earls need to be careful though. If they stay in melee for any period of time with the Blade Masters, it's going to be good night to them. Another charge, that one not quite as devastating. They were too close really to get up to charge speed. A couple more Noldorin Blade Masters fall though, and at this point they may not have enough men to cut their way through all these Bardian marksmen. At this point in time, these Barding Herd... Can the Barding Herd really pull this out? The balance of forces is evenly matched. The Linden units are actually wavering. A charge from the Elves of Dale here would be enough to rout them off. I think the Elves are going to go for the plentiful units of 4 Linden Archers in the backfield, however. And you can see that the Black Shots are being targeted. A very depleted unit of Harland Infantry trying to get into them. And the Noldorin Blade Masters, even with only 13 of them, they are mulching their way through this unit of Bardian Marksmen. The Elves need to charge into the back of these 4 Linden Marines and rout them, I think. They're trying to kill off the archers, but they're not going to be able to kill off the archers quickly enough. 4 Linden Archers are still going to be shooting into the Blackshot Dragon Slayers. Only 11 of them left, but they're going to be easily able to polish off this unit of Harlinden Infantry. I'm not sure the Bardian Marksmen have actually managed to kill any Noldorin Blade Masters in melee, which would make sense. They are one-to-one one of the most difficult infantry units to bring down. That high skill, the huge damage values that Elven Swordmaster units tend to have. But this might be enough to do some substantial damage. Nice charge there from the melee car. I don't think any of the Noldorin Blade one of them did. 2 maybe? Yeah, they only killed 2. And also some of the Earls fell as a result of that charge as well. The Barding Herd, however, have managed to win this fight over here. They caused the 4 Linden Marines to break, so I eat my words. The Barding Herd have proven themselves to be good even against Linden. A central pillar to Dale, to be sure. But the Bardian Marksmen over here as well, despite having a huge numbers advantage, ultimately fell to the Noldorin Blade Masters. But there are only 5 of them left. And that could be the break that Dale was hoping for. That wasn't a very good charge, though. This could be the end of their cavalry. At this point, it might be worth just sending the Elves to stop the 4 Linden Archers from firing and try and finish off the Noldorin Blade Masters with the Black Shots. The Black Shots still have some ammunition as well. Could that prove to be the difference maker? I mean, I guess this is where we find out whether the Noldorin Blade Masters are truly the strongest. 4 Linden Archers getting charged by the Elves of Dale in the background. Noldorin Blade Masters, only 4 of them left, and the Black Shots are no pushovers in melee. Well, let's go and see what's happening over here. I think the Barding Herd, what's left of them, got sent into this clump of 4 Linden Archers, who are actually out of ammunition, I think. The last of the Barding Herd bravely fighting, but ultimately dying. There's only 3 Earls left. So, yeah, there's only 3. I'm not sure these 4 Linden Archers might honestly be what wins Linden the fight at this point. Because I simply don't think that Dale have got enough forces left to win this. You can see the General killing off a Noldorin Blade Master. There's only 1 of them left. Good lord, this is close. What's that? Ah, I see. I was wondering where those arrows were coming from. This very depleted unit of 4 Linden Archers who are shaken. I think this is going to go in Linden's favour though. They just don't have enough left, Dale. Ultimately, it's going to be the 4 Linden Archers in melee that I think are going to pull this out for Linden. If they just had a few more of their Earls left alive, Dale would be able to charge the Linden Archers into submission. But as is... What is that over there? Oh, there's a single Bardian Marksman who survived his encounter with the Noldorin Blade Masters. That's certainly not going to be enough to pull Dale out here, though. I mean, to be fair, these Blackshot Dragon Slayers are... Can they do it? I mean, it is only 4 Linden Archers. That General still going. King Brand, the reskinned Knight of Illuminas. Again, it might come down to the fact the Earls simply don't have a big enough charge bonus, and there goes the General. That's the end of the Black Shots, and with that I think that is the end of Dale's challenge in this fight. Needless to say, It says allied. It says it's 8%, but you have to remember that a lot of the Linden forces have actually routed, whereas a lot of the Dale forces were killed. It's very rare that you see a lot of Elven routing as well, but in this situation you did, so maybe the loss of the general did affect them in the long run. Whereas Dale's general, of course, survived until the very end, keeping their morale together a little bit more. One Bardian marksman trying to take pot shots at the 4 Linden archers. Even so, I mean, even with this, Linden are probably a little bit concerned, because I mean, this Earl will not go down lightly, although he has been in combat for quite some time at this point, and on his own, the lack of the charge bonus will really hurt. What a close fight though. This is one of the closest 1v1s I've seen in a long time. And it's between, you know, I think Dale deserves quite a lot of credit. I mean, they're not exactly the most highly thought of faction at the moment, and yet here, they went toe to toe with one of the best. Almost did it. And again, I think this does... Well, there goes the Earl, so yeah, it's going to be the final Bardian marksman at this point. It does showcase, though, one of Dale's main problems. You know, one of their lower tier units, their Lake Town units, were absolutely dumpstered, as you might expect against Linden. But it is a bit of a problem. I mean, Dale don't really have any happy middle ground units. You either go for their sort of garbage Lake Town units, or you go for the significantly more expensive stuff like the Barding Herd and the Earls of Escaroth. Well, is this man going to live to tell the tale? The one surviving member of this Dalian army. He's eager. He's shaken. He's wavering. He's going to break. Point blank shot. Something to remember him by. And there he goes. He did not break, to be fair. He died with the rest of his army.
Victory is ours. Let it be a salve upon our wounds.
Yeah, very, very good. Only 24 Linden archers remain for Linden. The most Pyrrhic of Pyrrhic victories. Obviously Dale was a substantially larger army than Linden, as you would expect. But again, a lot of Lake Town units. Linden in general, obviously being the elves, have got lower unit counts. Although Linden of all the elves do tend to bring the biggest armies. Yeah, very, very good indeed. So what did the damage for Linden? Well, the Noldorin Blade Masters, unsurprisingly, doing very, very well. They proved themselves to be an exceptional unit in this fight, carving their way through the Dalian infantry, and ultimately the damage they did prove to be quite telling. Because if you imagine, you know, if they had been killed off slightly earlier, if Dale still had those Bardian marksmen, then Dale would have won this fight. Ultimately, the Noldorin Blade Masters getting just the right amount of kills to ensure victory. Harland infantry doing a decent job on the front line. But mainly, of course, the pikes. I mean, this unit of Mithlon pikemen, this unit of 4 Linden pikemen in particular, those pikes which just absolutely destroyed the Lake Town units, made the Dalian front line just, you know, in places crumble. If it wasn't for the Barding Herd, this fight would have been substantially more one-sided in favour of Linden. But fortunately, the Barding Herd were there. 4 Linden archers, of course, the heroes in many ways, pulling out the victory for Linden right at the end. Yeah, really, really, really good. And I'm not sure I can really criticise anything. From any of the players, really. I mean, you could argue maybe that Linden's cavalry play could have been more united. You know, he could have used all his 4 cavalry units all together to try and charge into the Dalian skirmishers, do more significant damage immediately, and sort of try not to bother with the front line, rear-charging the front line, because Linden were always going to win that anyway, and he ultimately lost his chariots doing that. But that's such a minor thing in the end, because the chariots did do a decent amount of damage, and they did do their job of disrupting the Dalian skirmishers long enough for Linden to just about win. As for Dale, I'm not really sure I can criticise. I mean, there are a few units which you maybe could have brought instead. I mean, the Swordmasters of Karnan would have been better in melee at dealing with Elven units, human Swordmaster unit, of course. The only problem with that is they are not particularly good at receiving arrow fire, and throughout this entire fight the 4 Linden archers were picking apart individual Dalian units, and if the Swordmasters of Karnan were on the field, they would have been a lightning rod for all of the Linden skirmishers. Could he perhaps have invested less heavily in his Lake Town units? Could he have cut out the Dalian cavalry unit and instead brought some more Earls to try and hold down the front line? Maybe. But it's difficult. I think that, honestly, the composition wasn't too bad from Dale in the end. The Lake Town units were garbage, yes, but he kind of had to bring some of them because his skirmishers did very well, and that was where a lot of his investment lay. And I wouldn't suggest he cut out any of the skirmishers here, because the Dalian marksmen, Bardian marksmen, and Blackshot Dragon Slayers all did exactly what they needed to for Dale. It just wasn't quite enough in the end. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. Very good match. We've had some good ones on the grassy plain recently, actually. It's good to see some nice high-level play. Next, I'm not sure what would be next, honestly. I'm not really sure in what order I'm going to be releasing all of this stuff anyway. I've just sort of got... I'm trying to record as much as I can over the weekend to have a nice build-up so that I can sort of post up as needed in the week to come. But I do have another large Siege of the Grey Havens, which I can do. Probably see that relatively soon as well. Got a few games with Imladris, which should be interesting to see. But regardless of what it is, I hope you will join me for it, and I hope you enjoyed this too.